She stood at the edge of the stage and felt the sound hit her like a wave. 50,000 people, maybe more. Their voices merged into something that was no longer individual cheers, but a single living roar. Her name, repeated over and over, rising from the floor of the arena and coming back down to her like something she had released into the world and could never fully take back. Dolly, Dolly, Dolly. The production manager touched her elbow. 30 seconds, he said. She nodded. She had done this 1,000 times. The lights would drop, the band would hit the opening chord, and she would walk out into that darkness and become the thing the crowd had paid to see. Dolly Parton, the icon, the voice, the rhinestones, and the smile and the laugh so big it seemed to fill whatever room she was in. But in this particular 30 seconds, something unexpected happened. She closed her eyes, and the arena disappeared. The memory came with a force she hadn't expected. Not in fragments, not in soft impressionistic flashes, but complete and vivid. She was 8 years old, standing on the front porch of the cabin on Locust Ridge. The morning was cold, the mountains were still wrapped in blue-gray mist, and she was wearing a coat, not just any coat, a coat her mother had made. That coat, that small, ridiculous, beautiful, heartbreaking coat, was the thing that had made her who she was. 15 seconds. She opened her eyes. The production manager watched her, headset blinking green. She gave him the big Dolly smile, the one that had graced 1,000 magazine covers, the one that never quite let anyone know what was happening behind it. "I'm ready," she said. But she wasn't thinking about the concert anymore. She was thinking about Tennessee. What happened in that cabin would shape every decision Dolly Parton ever made. But the story most people don't know isn't about the music. It's about the coat. You have to understand where Dolly Parton came from before you can understand anything else about her. Locust Ridge is not a place that appears on most maps. It sits in Sevier County, Tennessee, tucked into the folds of the Great Smoky Mountains. The kind of place where the hollers run deep, and the nearest town feels like a distant world when you are a child with no way to get there, and no reason to believe anything beyond those mountains has anything waiting for you. In January of 1946, the winter was particularly hard. Robert Lee Parton, everyone called him Lee, was 22 years old, a sharecropper who worked whatever land and job he could find. He had calloused hands, quiet pride, and a profound love for the woman he had married. A.V. Lee Carolina Owens, 19, who carried within her a kind of music, not just in her voice, which was remarkable, but in the way she held her children, as though they were as sacred as anything in the Bible. On January 19, 1946, A.V. Lee gave birth to her fourth child in that cabin. They named her Dolly Rebecca Parton. The doctor who delivered her was paid not in money. Money was not something the Partons had in any reliable quantity, but in a bag of oatmeal. A bag of oatmeal. That is the world Dolly Parton came into. Not cruelty. The Partons were not cruel people, but the particular scarcity of Appalachian mountain poverty in the years after the war, when the promises of prosperity reshaping the rest of America had not yet found their way up into the hollers of Sevier County. The cabin had one room for sleeping, eating, celebrating, grieving, the particular closeness of 12 children whose names Dolly would recite like a song. Willardine, David, Denver, Bobby, Stella, Cassie, Randy, Floyd, Frida, Rachel, and more. 12 children who ate from the same table and wore each other's clothes when those clothes held together long enough to be passed down. They were poor, not picturesque poor, the kind softened by nostalgia and golden light, the kind where you are cold in winter because there is not enough firewood, and hungry sometimes, and you know you are hungry because it is a physical fact in your body, not a metaphor. And yet Dolly would say, years later, that she never felt poor in spirit. The richness of her childhood came from her mother's singing, her grandfather's preaching, the mountains themselves, permanent and enormous, indifferent to human suffering, in a way that felt comforting rather than cold. She was not performing when she said these things. She meant every word. But she also meant the hunger. She also meant the cold, and she also meant the coat. Because before Dolly could carry her gift out of those mountains, something happened she would spend the rest of her life understanding. It started the winter she was in second grade, and it ended on a school bus. The winter Dolly was in second grade. The cold came early and stayed late. She had outgrown her coat. There was no money for a new one. There was, in the Parton household, almost never money for something as singular as a new coat for one child when 11 others had equally pressing needs. Avie Lee looked at the problem the way she looked at most problems, as something to be solved with whatever materials were available. She gathered scraps, bits of fabric from old clothes, from worn-out quilts, from things that had been kept because you never knew when they might be useful. The particular hoarding of poverty, the instinct to hold on to everything because everything might someday be the thing that saves you. She sat by the fire in the evenings, after the children were fed, and she sewed. She sewed a coat. It was made of scraps, dozens of different fabrics in dozens of different colors, stitched together with a care and precision that was itself a kind of love letter, if you knew how to read it. When she finished, she dressed Dolly in it. "You look beautiful," she told her. Dolly believed her. She went to school. The other children noticed. Some said nothing. Some looked away. But some laughed, the bright, uncomplicated laughter of children who have not yet learned that laughter can be a weapon. And the laughter was directed at the coat, and therefore at Dolly, and therefore at everything the coat represented. She sat down and looked out the window. She did not cry. Not because she wasn't hurt. She was, with the particular acute pain of a child whose mother's love has just been turned into a source of mockery. But something happened inside her in that moment that would define the rest of her life. A quiet, fierce refusal. A decision made without words. She decided that the coat was beautiful. She decided her mother's love was the most valuable thing she owned. She decided that the judgment of people who could only see what something looked like, and not what it meant, not what it cost, not what it was made of, was a judgment she did not need to accept. She was 8 years old. She was already, in her bones, the woman she would become. But knowing who you are is not the same as knowing how to get where you're going. And the road out of Locust Ridge would test everything that Coate had taught her, including on the day her own father told her to stop dreaming. Music ran through the Parton family the way the Little Pigeon River ran through Sevier County, constantly, fed by sources so numerous it was impossible to say where it began. Avie Lee sang. Robert Lee played banjo. Her grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher whose services were less performances than full-body events. The Holy Spirit, not a concept, but a presence you felt in your hands and your feet. Dolly absorbed all of it. She was singing before she could form words. She was performing before she understood what performance was. Standing on the porch with a tobacco stick as a microphone, singing to the chickens, to the mountains, to anyone who would listen. Her uncle Bill Owens noticed. He was Avie Lee's younger brother, a man with ambitions the mountains could not contain. He played guitar, wrote songs, watched Dolly perform at a church gathering when she was around 7 years old, and what he saw changed the direction of both their lives. "You've got something," he told her afterward. She already knew. But knowing and doing are separated by everything that can go wrong in between. Lee Parton sat his daughter down one evening. He was a good man. What he said could be misread as lack of support, and that would be wrong. He was a man who understood the world in the physical, immediate way that only people who have truly scraped against poverty can understand. "Dreams don't put food on the table," he told her. Not cruelly, with love, the complicated kind that looks like discouragement but is actually protection. You need something real to fall back on. Dolly looked at her father. She understood what he was saying. She also knew, with the quiet certainty of a person who has found the thing they are meant for, that she could not follow his advice. Not because she didn't love him, but because some truths are larger than fear, and she had found one of them. She would go. She didn't tell him that night. She nodded, helped clear the dishes, went to bed. But the decision was made. The day after she graduated from Sevier County High School, she got on a bus to Nashville, 18 years old, a suitcase, a guitar, and a head full of songs. What waited for her there was not what she had imagined. And what she almost lost was not her career, it was herself. June 1964, Nashville. She had spent her entire childhood watching what poverty does to people. Not just to their bodies and bank accounts, but to their sense of possibility. She had watched it make people small, make them afraid, make them tell their children that dreams don't put food on the table. She had decided not to accept that. Her father stood at the door of the cabin and watched her go. In his face she could see the war between fear and something quieter, something that had always been there underneath. Pride. Love. The particular love of a parent who has given everything they had and is now watching their child carry it into the world. "Write me," he said. Every week, she told him, she kept the promise. Nashville in 1964 was not generous to a girl from the hollers. The polished Nashville sound of the early 1960s had moved away from Appalachian rawness towards something smoother, something suited to the suburban audience the industry was courting. She was told her voice was too distinctive, her songs too personal. She needed to soften her image, smooth her accent, less her, more like what was already selling. She smiled and thanked them, went back to her barely furnished apartment, and wrote more songs. She had not come this far to become someone else. The professional rejection was survivable. What she hadn't expected was the loneliness. The private kind that fame cannot fix, because at this point the fame hadn't arrived yet. And in that silence, she understood something about the coat she hadn't understood as a child. What Dolly Parton carried out of Sevier County was not only talent. She carried the smell of her mother's kitchen, the sound of her grandfather's voice in worship. The mountains, not as nostalgic abstraction, but as a standard, a measure, a reminder that she had come from something real that no amount of success or failure could undo. She carried the coat, not literally. She could not have said where it ended up. But she carried what it meant, the lesson stitched into every patchwork square. That beauty is not about the materials. That love can make something out of nothing. That what looks like a disadvantage from the outside can be, from the inside, a kind of grace. She was lonely in Nashville. This is the part that surprises people. The image doesn't fit the public persona, the woman who seems to exist in a permanent state of warmth and competence and unflappable good humor. But the persona was not yet fully formed. She was still becoming it. She called her mother when she could afford it. She wrote letters to her father. She went home for holidays, watching the landscape shift until the mountains appeared, always exactly as she had left them, indifferent to the passage of time. The mountains did not care whether she was famous. She found this comforting. And then something shifted, not a dramatic breakthrough, more like a tide, the kind you only recognize looking back. The kind of change that happens not in a studio or on a stage, but in a quiet moment when no one is watching. Back in the arena, the production manager touched her elbow again. 30 seconds, he said. She was still in it, in the memory, in Tennessee, in the mountains. But she was also here. Both things were true at the same time. This was something she had learned. The past and the present are not opposites. They are layers. You can live in both at once if you pay attention. She thought about her father, who had died years ago, who had never been fully at ease with the scale of what she had become. Not because he wasn't proud, but because the scale of it was genuinely incomprehensible from the vantage point of a man who had spent his life measuring success in terms of whether his children had enough to eat. She thought about her mother, about the coat, and then she thought about something she had started in 1995. The Imagination Library, a program that mailed a free book every month to every child from birth until they started school, in communities where books were as rare as they had been in her own childhood. It had started because she remembered. She remembered what it was to grow up in a house where the Bible was the only book. She remembered teachers who had, occasionally, pressed a book into her hands and changed something in her. She remembered wanting more and having no way to get it. She had found a way to give it, not to one child, to millions. 50,000 people heard Dolly Parton sing that night, but only one of them knew what she was thinking about when she stepped into the light. And now, so do you. The lights dropped. The crowd noise swelled to something beyond sound, a physical pressure, a collective held breath. She stepped toward the stage entrance. In the dark, for just a moment, she was not Dolly Parton, the icon. She was Dolly Rebecca Parton, born January 19th, 1946, in a one-room cabin in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, fourth child of Robert Lee and Avie Lee Parton, sister to 11, granddaughter of a preacher, great niece of the Smoky Mountains themselves, a girl in a coat made of rags, a coat made with love. She stepped into the light. The roar hit her like a wave. 50,000 voices, her name repeated until it was less a name than a force. And she opened her arms to it, the way you open your arms to something larger than yourself that you have somehow, against all reason and probability, managed to reach. She smiled, the big Dolly smile. But this time, anyone watching closely enough would have seen something woven through it. Underneath the professional warmth, something that costs more. Gratitude. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what you started with, and exactly how unlikely it was that you would end up here. She took the microphone. She sang. The Smoky Mountains are still there. Locust Ridge is still there. Smaller now, quieter, the kind of place that time has moved past without quite erasing. The cabin where Dolly Parton was born no longer stands. But the mountains remain exactly as they were when a little girl stood on a porch with a tobacco stick microphone and believed, with the unreasonable certainty of the genuinely gifted, that the world beyond them was going to hear her. It did. But here is the thing about Dolly Parton that gets lost in the rhinestones and the records. She never stopped being the girl from Locust Ridge, not as nostalgia, not as brand. She never stopped being that girl because she understood, with a clarity most people spend their whole lives trying to reach, that the girl from Locust Ridge was not a starting point to be left behind, but a foundation to be built on. Everything she is was made in those mountains. The voice, the stubbornness, the faith, the humor that disarms people who come expecting a caricature and find instead a mind, the capacity for joy that has survived grief, the capacity for generosity that has survived scarcity, the coat. She wrote the song eventually. Coat of Many Colors, released in 1971. The song, she has said, is her favorite of everything she has ever written. Not because it is the most technically accomplished, but because it is the most true. The song ends with a child standing in the warmth of something that looks, to the world, like nothing much at all. But to the child it is everything. That child is still standing there. She always will be.